Hi, this is Amanda Klimaszewski reporting for ETM 101 Weather and Climate of Alaska. This is the Unit 12 investigation. First, we're going to look at Alaska and Kodiak and going to be comparing the cloudiness and the temperature forecasts that were shown. And as we look at Monday, today's weather map, we can see that most of the illusion chain is covered here with some clouds, also the Nome area over here, and then over on the northeastern side of Alaska is covered with clouds. Kind of leaves a pretty big open spot right here where it's clear, no cloud coverage at all. And as we flip through them, we can kind of see that the cloudiness covers the general same areas but shifts a little bit. Now it's more of the northern coast of Alaska that's covered with clouds. It's the same thing, more of the northern spot is covered with clouds, except for cloudiness is starting to come up here from the south part of Alaska and go up into the interior. And then kind of scattered clouds all over Alaska, leaving the central region pretty open and clear, but again, a lot of coverage over the Aleutian Chain, the northern part of Alaska and the southern part of Alaska. And as you can see, it kind of stays a trend that most of Alaska is covered in clouds until you come to Friday, today's weather, and see that pretty much the whole state is actually covered with clouds now. Got some rain, some fog, and snow scattered across the state as well. The same sort of trend we can kind of still see occurring here, mostly covering Alaska with clouds and some rain, fog, and snow. Here it looks like the state is almost completely covered with a good cloud coverage. And as we can see here, the NWS station showed pretty big spikes around Thursday for the temperature in Unalaska, kind of dropping down again during the week, and got some spiking here going on, but mostly a consistent dropping from Monday up until Thursday, where it looks like it spiked about the middle of the day, dropped back down again. Sort of a different trend here for Kodiak. It looks like it started off a lot colder than what Unalaska was, dropped down Monday, and then spiked back up. Kind of had a lot more variation here than what Unalaska showed, and kind of going in the opposite direction of what Unalaska did. Their temperature seemed to drop as the week went on, whereas here in Kodiak it looks like it's spiking, but it's going up as the week goes on rather than decreasing like Unalaska did. As the weather map showed us, that most of the state was covered in cloudiness, and so I can kind of understand why Kodiak, it looks like their temperature would do this as the weather was changing, but mostly had a good cloud coverage, that it would stay consistently warmer, and if anything, the temperature would increase because of the increased cloud coverage towards the end of the week. And in the weather maps, we could have seen that the Anchorage and Wasilla area was pretty much covered in clouds the entire week. So again, like I was saying with the Kodiak weather, this variation in temperature makes sense to me because of the cloud coverage that we did see during the week, as it would have a pretty big effect on the temperature and the increasing and decreasing spikes that we see here. But it looks pretty consistent overall as the week went on, that it stayed around the 50 to 55 range. We got some low spikes down to 35 degrees, looks like on Tuesday, but increased in temperature consistently through the rest of the week. Wasilla here showing kind of the same pattern as what Anchorage did. It looks like it got a little bit colder on Monday and then really spiked up later during the day on Monday. Got a pretty big temperature variation there, dropping again, then coming up, and then it looks like it started staying consistently around the 45 to 50 degree range from Friday until Sunday. And this would make more sense as the cloud coverage wasn't changing as much during that portion of the week as what it was earlier in the week, which may have had an effect on the temperatures being more consistent within 5 to 10 degrees for the rest of the week. And you can see here for the Fairbanks region that there was some pretty good spikes in temperature throughout the day, dropping pretty low during the night and then spiking pretty high, almost to 55 degrees on average in the middle of the day every day. Slowly increased towards the end of the week, which again you could expect to see as the cloud coverage did start covering Fairbanks more in the Saturday, Sunday. I would have to say that the Kodiak and Alaska region was probably the easiest to forecast, considering that it was covered in clouds most of the time. The Wasilla Anchorage area would probably be the next easiest to forecast, and then last would have been Fairbanks. Even though all of them generally followed the trend of what was predicted in the graphs, there was some variations in the actual temperatures, and Fairbanks was probably the most difficult to forecast because at the beginning of the week there was no cloud coverage over the Fairbanks region, and then at the end of the week there was an increase in temperature that we saw that we may not have been able to predict as well, because earlier in the week there was no cloud coverage, meaning that it was going to be a little bit colder, and as the clouds covered it warmed up some towards the end of the week. As we saw with the temperature, there was an average higher temperature for the Kodiak and Alaska region than was expected to have been. This could have been due to the cloud coverage, as mentioned earlier. With the cloud coverage, it would cause the temperatures to increase a little bit more. And as we can see here for Wednesday, tomorrow's weather, this is predicted for what was going to be seen on Thursday. Again, there's a lot of cloud coverage, some fog and rain in the region. So this may have had something to do with it, the extra cloud coverage, making it warmer. And then again here it was issued on Wednesday for what Friday was expected to look like. Again, the same trend as seen before for what they were expecting on Thursday. A lot of cloud coverage, some rain and fog again. And then here's what actually happened on Friday. This is today's Friday weather map, showing that there was a lot of cloud coverage as what was predicted for the other 2 days. Not as much rain and fog as what they had expected though in the area, which may have had something to do with the increased temperatures from what they were expecting. Without the rain and fog, maybe that had something to do with why there was an increase in temperatures than what they had expected to see. As far as what I can recall from my observations in the Fairbanks region, the weather maps and the graph here do pretty well summarize what I remember seeing and observing for the Fairbanks region. And it is pretty typical for that time of year in September for the Fairbanks region to have such variations during the day between the night and daytime that you can see here, where it spikes down to 30 degrees and then during the day it goes back up to 50 or higher. So that is something that I would have expected to see, and I do recall seeing, and it's pretty standard for that time of year, having the weather variations between the day and nighttime. And then again at the end of the week with more cloud coverage, I would have expected to see an increase in temperature like we did, where it reached about 65. This isn't too typical for it to get this warm in September. I remember this week being pretty nice and fairly warm. I do recall that it was clear most of the week, and then again at the end of the week is when it started to kind of cloud over and causing that increase in temperature again, and not as much variation between the day and nighttime and temperature because of the cloud coverage, keeping it more of a consistent overall temperature rather than having the large spikes and such huge variations that we were seeing for the rest of the week. And as we can see here in the map, it does depict pretty well what I was just talking about, how the Fairbanks region wasn't really covered with any clouds. It was pretty open and clear, which would have caused the greater variations between temperature in the day and nighttime, and not keeping it as warm as what it was, having the increase in temperature at the end of the week. And then here on Friday you can see that most of the state is pretty well covered with a good cloud coverage, including the Fairbanks region, and this is when we started noticing an increase in temperature overall in the Fairbanks region and less variation between the day and nighttime temperatures, keeping it at more of an overall consistent temperature between the day and nighttime. And this same trend going through Saturday, and still you can see here on Sunday the whole state is pretty well covered with a good cloud coverage. Again, the Fairbanks region being no exception to this, which would again explain the increase in temperature and less variation between the day and nighttime temperatures.